horse, a tired roan mare named Bess, blew a hard cloud of steam and dropped her head. Eli Carver ran a gloved hand down her neck, feeling the tremor of exhaustion that matched his own. "Almost, girl," he muttered. His voice was raw, stolen by the wind. The wind. It was the only thing alive up here. It came down the pine slopes of the Montana high country like a razor, carrying the iron smell of snow that had not yet fallen, but promised to. It was late October, 1883, and the sky was a bruised, heavy slate. The sun had given up an hour ago, leaving a weak, purple stain in the west. Eli pulled his collar tighter. The wool was stiff, smelling of wood smoke and old sweat. He was a man made of hard lines and old scars. The range war down in Wyoming had taken his youth, and the years since had taken everything else. Now, all that was left was this. He looked up the rise, through the jagged black teeth of the pines. He saw it, the cabin. It was just a dark box against the twilight, a scar on the land, no bigger than a woodshed. His brother, Jacob, had built it. Jacob, who had always been the softer one, the one who chased fool's gold and easy dreams. Eli had chased cattle in Pinkertons. They had not spoken in 6 years. The letter had found him in Laramie. It was 2 months old, written by a town marshal with bad spelling. Jacob Carver, hanged. Land dispute. Cabin is yours. Eli had sold his saddle for the roan and pointed north, not for grief. Grief was a luxury he had burned out of himself long ago. He came because it was the last thing, the last piece of a name he was tired of burying. He came because winter was coming, and he had nowhere else to be. He urged Bess forward, the crunch of pine needles and frosted earth muffled by the rising moan of the wind. The forest was deep, echoing with an isolation so profound it felt like a weight on his chest. This was a place where a man could disappear and the world would not notice. Jacob had proven that. Eli was 50 yards out when he stopped. He smelled it. Wood smoke. He tasted it on the air, sharp and fresh. His eyes narrowed, scanning the gloom. A thin gray curl was rising from the mud and stick chimney of the cabin. It was not the ghost of an old fire. It was new. His hand went, smooth and practiced, to the walnut grip of the Colt revolver at his hip. His body went still. He was no longer a brother coming to claim an inheritance. He was a man who had survived by assuming the worst. A squatter, or worse, the men who had hanged Jacob, come back to claim the property. He slid from the saddle. The mare whickered, a low, nervous sound. Eli pressed a hand to her muzzle, silencing her. He tethered her to a low-hanging larch, well back in the shadows. He pulled his Winchester from the scabbard. The metal was so cold it stung his skin even through the glove. He moved like a shadow. The cabin had one window, a small, dark square. Oiled paper, not glass. It was dark. The door was warped planking. He approached from the side, pressing his back to the rough-hewn logs. He could hear the wind, the whistle of it through the chinking. But nothing else, no voices, no movement. He stood by the door for a long minute, letting the cold seep into his bones, listening. There was a sound, a rustle, like a mouse in straw. He did not knock. He raised his boot, aimed for the spot just beside the latch, and kicked. The door flew open with a shriek of rotten wood and leather hinges. It slammed against the inside wall. Eli was through the opening in one motion, Winchester up, sweeping the small, dark room. "Do not move," he commanded, his voice a low growl. The room was rank. It smelled of rat droppings, damp earth, and fear. A small, sputtering fire in the hearth cast weak, dancing shadows. On the far side, against the wall, was a bed. Not a bed, really. Just a frame of raw pine logs lashed together, piled with straw and one filthy, threadbare quilt. And under the quilt, something moved. He saw a tangle of pale, messy hair. He saw 2 wide, terrified eyes. Then he saw the rifle barrel. It was an old Springfield, pitted with rust, the stock cracked. It was pointed straight at his chest. "Get out," a voice whispered. It was dry, fragile as a dead leaf. Eli stepped fully into the room, letting the last of the gray light frame him in the doorway. He lowered his own rifle. Just an inch. It was a woman. "I said get out," she repeated. Her voice cracked, but the rifle barrel held steady, though her arms trembled with the weight of it. Eli took in the scene. The cabin was a ruin. The floor was packed dirt. The roof leaked. He could see a dark stain of moisture on the wall. In the corner, a sack of flour, chewed open by rats, had spilled a pale dust. And the woman, she was holding the quilt up with one hand, the rifle with the other. He caught a flash of a white, bony shoulder. She had nothing on beneath the quilt. Her face was hollow, her cheekbones sharp as stones. She looked like she had not eaten a full meal in a month. She was barefoot, her feet blue with cold on the dirt floor. "Ma'am," Eli said, his voice flat. He let the Winchester rest in the crook of his arm. "Put the gun down." "No, you put yours down. You get out. This cabin's mine." Eli almost smiled. It would have been a cold, cruel thing. "This cabin," he said, stepping forward, "belongs to Eli Carver. That's me, my brother, Jacob Carver, built it." The woman's face crumpled, just for a second, then hardened again. "Jacob Carver is dead." "I am aware." He promised it to Mr. Rourke, my fiancé." Eli stopped. He looked at the floor, then back at her. A mail-order bride. That explained it. The worst kind of desperation. A woman who would cross a continent for a man she had never met, for a promise of a roof. Mr. Rourke," Eli said. "Where is he?" Her eyes dropped. The rifle barrel dipped. "He's dead," she whispered. He was a miner, up on the ridge. The tunnel collapsed, before I even got here." Eli sighed. It was a heavy sound, pushing the air from his lungs. Of course, a dead miner and a dead trapper, and this woman, caught between them. "I got to town," she said, her voice gaining a strange, brittle strength. "They told me he was gone. They told me to go back, but I had no money. I had nowhere." Her chin came up. "He wrote me letters. He said this cabin was his. He said Jacob Carver gave it to him for a debt. He said we would live here." "Jacob Carver," Eli said, "was my brother. He owed debts to half the territory, but he did not owe anyone this cabin. It was not his to give." He took another step. The room was barely 12 feet across. He was almost on top of her. "Stay back," she shrieked, hauling the heavy rifle up again. "I am not going to hurt you, ma'am, but I am cold, and I am tired, and this is my property. Now, put the gun down." "No." She was stubborn. He gave her that, and starving, and probably half mad with hunger and isolation. "I have been here for 3 weeks. I fixed the chimney. I patched the roof. This cabin is mine now." Eli looked at the chimney, which was still belching smoke into the room. He looked at the dark, wet stain on the wall. He looked at her, a pale wraith clutching a quilt and a gun. "You've done a poor job of it," he said. Her face flushed, a splotchy, angry red. "You have no right." "I have a right. I have the law." He did not. He had a letter, but she did not need to know that. He wanted her gone. He wanted the stove, the bed, and the silence. He wanted to grieve, or whatever this cold thing inside him was, and he did not want to do it with a starving woman in the room. "You cannot just throw me out," she said, her voice dropping again, the fight draining out of her. It is almost dark. The snow." "That is not my concern." But it was. He looked past her, through the ruined doorway he had made, into the swirling gray dark. The first flakes were starting to drift down. Big, wet, heavy flakes. The wind was a howl now. He knew this country. He knew what a night like this could do to a body, even a healthy one. She was gaunt, frail. She would be dead by morning. A frozen bundle of bones in a threadbare dress, assuming she even had one. He cursed, not at her, at Jacob, at the world, at the terrible, unyielding fact of his own humanity, the small, stubborn piece of it that had not yet died. He could not send her out. He let the stock of his Winchester hit the dirt floor with a thud. "What is your name?" She hesitated. Her eyes were full of suspicion. Clara Rourke." "Miss Rourke?" He nodded, sharp. "I am not putting you out. Not tonight." The relief that washed over her face was so absolute it was painful to watch. The rifle sagged in her grip. "But," Eli said, and his voice was granite, "we have an understanding. This cabin is mine. You are a guest, a temporary one." Clara clutched the quilt tighter. I have nowhere to go." "That is a problem for tomorrow, or the day after, when the snow stops." He walked past her, ignoring the rifle, and tossed his bedroll and saddlebags near the hearth. He had drawn a line. The hearth, the stove, and the floor space beside it. That was his, the leaking corner with the rickety bed. That was hers. He turned back to her. She was still sitting up, watching him, her eyes like a cornered animal's. "You claimed this cabin," he said, "but you are starving in it. What food do you have?" She gestured with her chin toward the chewed sack. "Flour, some salt, a little coffee." "And you were planning on eating that flour raw?" I set a snare. I was waiting." Eli looked at her arms, thin as sticks. "You do not look like you could dress a rabbit, even if you caught one." He unslung the canvas sack from his own shoulder. He pulled out a brace of rabbits, already frozen stiff, and a slab of salt pork wrapped in oilcloth. He tossed the pork onto the small, crude table. "Get dressed, ma'am. You can cook, or you can watch me do it. But I am eating, and I am not sharing this room with a naked woman." He did not mean it as a kindness, but the word naked hung in the air. He saw her flush again. He turned his back to her, a deliberate, dismissive gesture. He knelt at the hearth, poking at the weak fire, adding the kindling he had gathered on the ride up. He would not look at her. He would not acknowledge the vulnerability. He was offering shelter, not comfort. He heard a desperate rustling behind him, the scrape of cloth, the sound of her teeth chattering. He did not turn. When he finally did, she was huddled by the table, trying to saw at the salt pork with a dull skinning knife. She was wearing a dress, or what was left of one. It was gray calico, patched with so many different scraps of cloth it looked like a beggar's map. It was thin, useless against the cold that was now pouring through the broken door. "This ain't going to work," Eli growled. I am cutting it," she stammered. "Not that—" He stood up, towering over her in the small space. "This—" He gestured at the whole room, the broken door, the two of them. "We cannot live like this." "Then leave," she shot back, stubbornness flaring. "This was my place until you kicked the door in." "This was my brother's grave," Eli snapped. The words were out before he could stop them, louder than he intended. The violence in his own voice shocked him. Clara recoiled. He took a breath, the cold air stinging his lungs. This is my property. You are here on my sufferance." "And you are a brute," she whispered, but there was no heat in it, only exhaustion. "I am alive, Miss Rourke. That is all I am claiming to be." He took the knife from her. He went to the door, pulled the broken planks back into the frame, and used the knife to wedge the latch shut. It would not hold against a push, but it would stop the wind. He skinned one of the rabbits with deft, angry motions. He cut the salt pork. He found a rusty pot, scrubbed it with a handful of snow, and set it over the fire. He added water from a bucket that was half frozen. They did not speak while it cooked. The only sounds were the bubble of the pot, the howl of the wind, and the scrape of the rat that was still, incredibly, trying to get at the flour sack. When the stew was done, it was thin and gray, but it smelled of meat. He poured some into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, shaking so hard she nearly spilled it. She drank it, scalding hot, gulping it down like an animal. He refilled his own cup and sat on his bedroll by the stove. He ate slowly. She finished first. She sat on the edge of the bed, the empty cup in her lap, hugging the quilt around her shoulders over her dress. She was still watching him. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice small. Eli stared into the fire. "To get out of the wind." "No, why here?" He did not answer. He thought of Jacob's laugh. He thought of the letter from the marshal. He thought of the noose. "You claim this cabin," he said, changing the subject. "You claim it is yours, but you are dying in it. You would have been dead in a week, maybe less." "I would have managed," she said, but the lie was plain. "No," Eli said. "You would not have—" He finished his stew and set the cup down. "This is the agreement. You keep to your side." He pointed to the bed. "I keep to mine. You will help with the chores. You will patch my clothes. I will hunt. We will not talk unless it is necessary. When the spring thaw comes, you will leave." "And if I do not agree?" Eli looked at her. He let the silence stretch. He did not have to say it. She could see the wilderness through the cracks in the walls. "I agree," she whispered. "Good." He unrolled his bedding by the stove. It was the warmest place, but it was still bitterly cold. He took off his hat and his gun belt, placing the Colt right beside his head. He kept his boots on. He lay down, pulling his blanket up, and turned his back to her. The fire sputtered. The wind screamed. The cabin groaned like a ship in a storm. Eli Carver stared at the rough log wall, feeling the knots in the wood. He was tired in his bones. He wanted sleep. He wanted the silence he had come for. He closed his eyes. He heard her lie down, the rustle of straw. For an hour, there was only the wind. He drifted, balanced on the edge of sleep. Then he heard it. It was a small sound, a catch in her throat. She was trying to hide it, muffling it in the straw or the quilt. She was sobbing. It was not a loud, dramatic grief. It was a thin, hopeless animal sound, the sound of the end of the rope, the sound of a person who had nothing left, not even pride. Eli clenched his jaw. He hated the sound. It was weak. It was a noise that got under his skin, a reminder of all the tears he had refused to shed. He wanted to tell her to be quiet. He wanted to get up and shake her. He did nothing. He lay there, rigid, gripping the edge of his blanket. The sobbing went on, a terrible, quiet rhythm against the violence of the storm. Eli Carver did not sleep. He just waited, trapped in the dark, listening to the sound of the woman who was claiming his brother's cabin, one broken breath at a time. The days that followed were a silent, brutal arithmetic of survival. They fell into a rhythm that was not a partnership, but a simple sharing of a cage. The world outside the cabin ceased to exist. It was buried. The snow came down not in flakes, but in a solid, suffocating curtain. It piled against the walls, blocking the lower half of the new canvas window, plunging the one-room hut into a perpetual twilight. The wind never stopped. It was a living thing, a predator that clawed at the new roof shingles and whistled a low, maddening tune through the chinking. Eli was a creature of grim purpose. He would rise in the dark, his breath a white cloud in the frigid air, and pull on his boots. He would check his snares, often finding nothing but a drift of fresh snow. He would hunt, disappearing for hours, a tall, dark shape against the blinding white, and usually return with nothing. The deer had moved to lower ground. The rabbits were burrowed deep. He spent most of his time with Jacob's dull axe, fighting the snow to get at fallen timber, splitting wood until his shoulders ached. The stove was a hungry god that demanded constant sacrifice. Clara lived on her side of the line. She was a ghost. She made herself small, wrapping the threadbare quilt around her shoulders, her knees drawn to her chest on the straw tick. The cold was a physical pain, a set of iron teeth clamped deep in her bones. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. "Good morning" was a lie. "It is cold" was a useless fact. The cabin itself was failing. Eli's patch on the roof held, but a new leak had sprung near the chimney. A steady drip, drip, drip of icy water spattered onto the dirt floor. Clara put a tin cup under it. The sound was the room's only clock. And there were the rats. They had finished her small, spoiled cache of flour and had now turned their attention to his. Eli had moved his saddlebags, hanging them from a roof beam. But the rats were bold, skittering across the floor in the dim light, their small, dark eyes glinting. They were starving, too. For 3 days, Clara ate nothing. Her pride was a thin, brittle thing, but it was all she had left. She had agreed to his terms. He hunted, she did chores, but there were no chores to do. The floor was dirt, the pot was clean. She would not beg. She watched him eat his own dwindling rations, a piece of hardtack softened in hot water, a few strips of jerky, and she turned her face to the wall. On the 4th day, the hunger won. It was a gnawing, twisting thing that blurred her vision and made her hands tremble. She saw the bucket of filthy water he had hauled in, and the rag he used to clean his rifle. She saw the grime on the floor, the accumulated filth of her own occupancy and Jacob's before. She had to do something. She had to earn the stew he had given her that first night. She got off the bed. The movement sent a wave of dizziness through her, black spots dancing in her eyes. She gripped the edge of the bed frame, waiting for the cabin to stop spinning. She took the rag and dipped it in the near-frozen water. She got on her hands and knees and began to scrub the packed earth. It was a fool's task. She was just moving mud, making a darker, colder circle of filth. Her arms were weak as water. Her hair fell into her face. She was scrubbing at a spot near the stove, on his side of the line, when the world tilted. The black spots swarmed, connected, and became a heavy, final darkness. She did not fall. She crumpled, a slow-motion collapse, her cheek hitting the cold, wet dirt. Eli came in 10 minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. He carried 2 scrawny squirrels. He stopped. He looked down at the pale, still shape on the floor. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed his face. It was another problem, another mouth. He had come here for peace, to be alone with the ghost of his brother. And this woman was determined to die in his way. He stood over her for a long, quiet minute. He could see the pulse in her throat, a faint, desperate flutter. He could see the sharp ridge of her spine through the thin calico. He did not help her up. He did not touch her. He walked past her, hung the squirrels by the door, and began to build up the fire. The smell of the wood smoke, the crackle of the flames, pulled her back. Clara stirred. Her first feeling was the icy mud on her face. Her second was a profound, scalding humiliation. He was there. He was watching. She pushed herself up, her arms shaking so violently she could barely hold her own weight. She crawled, unable to stand, back to her bed. She pulled the quilt over her head. Hiding, she was shaking, not from the cold, but from the shame. That evening, the smell of stew filled the cabin. The squirrels had not been much, but Eli had added a handful of dried beans and salt pork. It smelled rich. It smelled like life. He sat on his stool, his back to her, and ate. He finished his bowl, the scrape of the spoon against the tin loud in the silence. Clara watched his back, her stomach twisting into a single, aching knot. He stood up. He ladled the rest of the stew, a thick, full portion, into her cup. He walked to the small table that stood between their two worlds and set the cup down, precisely on her side. Then he went back to his bedroll, sat, and began the ritual of cleaning his Winchester, the metallic shk-shk of the oiled rag the only sound. She waited. She waited until she was sure he was absorbed, until his shoulders were set in a way that told her he would not turn. Then, like a starved animal, she darted from the bed, seized the cup, and scrambled back to her refuge. She drank it, hiding under the quilt, tears of gratitude and fury streaming into the hot, salty broth. He had fed her. He had shamed her. He had saved her. She hated him for all of it. As the stew warmed her belly, the memories came. Hunger had kept them at bay. The food brought them crashing back. She was not in Montana. She was in Kentucky. The air was not sharp and cold. It was green, wet, and heavy. It smelled of damp roses and rich earth. She was 16. She was the hired girl at the parsonage, a plain, quiet girl with nowhere else to go. And there was Silas, the preacher's son. He was 20, with a soft mouth and his father's righteous blue eyes. He was meant to be studying for the seminary, but his hands were restless. He found her in the pantry, by the sacks of sugar. He found her in the garden, by the climbing roses. He told her she was pretty. He told her she was not like the others. He whispered promises he never meant to keep. She was lonely. She had been lonely all her life. She believed him. The discovery was inevitable. His mother, a woman made of iron and judgment, found them in the carriage house. Clara remembered the sound of the woman's gasp, the way Silas had scrambled away from her, pulling his clothes straight, his face pale and frightened. "Father!" he had yelled, pointing at Clara. She did this! She tempted me!" The preacher arrived, a tall, booming man whose God was a God of vengeance. He did not ask questions. He saw Clara, her dress undone, her face stricken. He saw his son, the picture of violated innocence. It was over in an hour. She was a harlot, a Jezebel, a seductress who had tried to trap the preacher's son. She was dismissed, her name and her sin pronounced from the pulpit that very Sunday. A serpent in our midst. The town, which had never noticed her before, now noticed nothing else. The women whispered when she passed, pulling their skirts aside. The men looked at her with a new, ugly hunger in their eyes. She had been ruined, not by the act, but by the accusation. She had not fled. She had been run out. The preacher himself had bought her a wagon ticket west, to a place where your kind might be overlooked. The shame was a physical thing, a brand on her skin. It had followed her to Missouri, where she saw the advertisement for a mail-order bride, a miner in Montana, a new life, a place where no one knew her name. But the world was small. A woman in the Montana town, the one who ran the boarding house, had a cousin in Kentucky. The letter had arrived before Clara did. When she walked into the general store, asking for Mr. Rourke, the whispers had started again. That's her, the one who, with the preacher's son. Even here, at the edge of the world, her shame had found her. When she learned Rourke was dead, the town marshal had not been kind. He told her the decent folk of the town wanted her gone. The cabin was her only refuge, the only place left to go. The stew was gone. The cup was empty. Clara wiped her eyes on the rough sleeve of her dress. She looked at the man across the room. He was a brute, but he had fed her. He did not look at her with that ugly hunger. He did not look at her at all. For that, she was grateful. The truth shifted. She was in his debt. She had to earn her keep. She took the small sewing kit from his saddlebag. It held a thick needle and waxed thread, meant for repairing leather tack. She took the ruined flour sack that the rats had abandoned and began to cut it into squares. She sat on her bed, hour after hour, and began to patch her dress. Her fingers, stiff and cracked with cold, fumbled with the needle, but she worked with a meticulous, desperate focus, She was not just mending the cloth. She was mending herself, stitch by stitch. Eli watched her from the corner of his eye. He said nothing, but he saw the way she held the needle, the stubborn set of her jaw. The next day, the leak by the chimney turned from a drip to a steady, thin stream. The tin cup overflowed, creating a small pond on the floor. Eli cursed, long and low. He got up and went to the corner where Jacob had left a small, forgotten pile of belongings. He pulled out a toolbox. It held a rusty axe head, a saw with missing teeth, and a hammer with a handle that was split down the middle. Useless, Eli muttered, kicking the box. But he took the axe head and spent an hour fixing it to a new handle he carved from a piece of firewood. He went outside. The snow was waist deep. He spent the entire day fighting it, climbing a tall pine and sawing off branches, then splitting them into crude shingles. He was a dark, furious engine of labor. He hated the cabin. He hated his brother for his lazy building. He hated the woman inside who was forcing him to do this. Late in the afternoon, he climbed onto the roof. It was a perilous, stupid thing to do. The roof was slick with ice and snow. He tethered himself with a rope, and, balancing against the freezing wind, he nailed down the new shingles, his hammer blows echoing in the vast, white silence. When he came back inside, he was covered in snow, his beard frosted white. The dripping had stopped. He did not look at Clara. He sat by the stove, shaking with cold and exhaustion. She did not thank him. She knew he had not done it for her. He had done it for himself, for the dry patch of floor where he slept. But she picked up her needle and thread, and, in the dying light, she kept sewing. The next day, he tackled the window. The oiled paper was in shreds. The wind found every hole. He tore it out. He took a heavy canvas tarp, Jacob's last, and nailed it over the frame. The wind stopped, but so did the light. The cabin was plunged into a darkness that was almost total, relieved only by the fire and the cracks in the walls. It was warmer. It was safer, but it was a tomb. A week passed. They lived in the dark tomb, 2 animals in a den. They spoke only in necessities. More wood. Water bucket is low. Then the new storm came. It was not a snowstorm. It was a violent, unnatural rage. It began with a low rumble in the distance, a sound that did not belong in the frozen world. "Thunder," Eli said, looking up from the snare he was mending. Clara's head snapped up. She went pale. "No, it cannot be." But it was. The rumbles grew. The wind rose to a shriek. And then, the lightning. A brilliant, blue-white flash illuminated the canvas window, printing its shadow on the wall. Followed an instant later by a crack so loud, it sounded as if the mountains were splitting in 2. The cabin shook. A nearby tree, struck by the bolt, shattered with the sound of a cannon shot. Eli was on his feet, hand on his colt, his eyes scanning the dark. From the bed, there was a sound. It was not a whimper. It was a raw, lung-bursting scream of pure terror. "No, get off me! Please, God, no, stop!" Eli was across the room in 2 strides, his heart pounding. He thought the rancher who'd hanged Jacob had come. He thought they were being attacked. He reached the bed. She was not being attacked. She was alone, thrashing wildly, fighting the quilt as if it were a living man. Her eyes were wide open, staring, but seeing nothing in the room. "Get away! Do not touch me! No!" she sobbed. "Ma'am," Eli's voice was a bark. "Rourke, wake up!" He reached out, his big hand closing on her shoulder to shake her. "No!" she shrieked, recoiling from his touch with so much force she slammed her head against the log wall. The dull, solid thud of her skull hitting the wood broke the spell. Her eyes cleared. She gasped, focusing on the large, dark shape looming over her. She saw him. She saw the cabin. She whimpered, pulling the quilt up to her chin, her whole body shaking. "Who? What?" she panted, still lost. "It's Carver," he said. His voice was rough, but he kept it low. You were dreaming, screaming. The reality settled on her like a shroud. The shame was immediate, a hot flush on her cold skin. The storm, she lied, her voice trembling. The lightning, it startled me. You were not screaming about lightning, Eli said. His voice was flat, cutting through the lie. You were telling someone to get off of you. Clara turned her face away, pressing it into the damp straw of the mattress. It is none of your business. It is my business when it sounds like murder. He stood there, a heavy, awkward silence between them. He should go back to his bedroll. She was awake. It was over, but he did not move. Another rumble of thunder, more distant now. Clara flinched, a violent, full-body tremor. It is just thunder, he said. I know what it is, she whispered, her voice muffled by the quilt. It just reminds me. He waited. The silence in the cabin was deeper than the storm. Reminds you of what? He asked. His voice was softer than he intended. She was quiet for so long he thought she'd gone back to sleep, or was refusing to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, dead. The men in Kentucky, after they said I ruined the preacher's son. Eli went still. He told them, his father, he said a woman like me, a harlot, needed a mark, so that decent folk would know what I was, so I could not tempt another. She was not crying. She was just speaking, reciting a cold, hard fact. They held me down, she whispered. The words were like chips of stone. 4 of them, from the church, the preacher's wife. She watched. She held the lantern. She told me to pray for my wicked soul. She said it was God's justice. Clara's hand moved, sliding under the quilt to rest on her own left shoulder. It was storming, like this. I remember the rain on the window. They took a piece of wire. From the fire. They marked me, like livestock. Eli stared into the dark. He did not need to see the scar. He could feel it, a burning in the cold room. He had seen men branded, rustlers, deserters. He had seen the self-righteousness of men delivering justice. He had seen it on his brother's porch, the rope still swaying. I have the dreams, she said, her voice small. When a storm comes, it always comes back. Eli looked at his own hands. They were large, calloused, scarred from rope burns and frostbite. He thought about reaching out, placing a hand on her shoulder. A gesture of something, comfort, acknowledgement. He could not. The distance between them was more than the 6 feet of packed earth. It was a canyon. He did not go back to his bedroll. He turned, walked to the stove, and picked up the small, 3-legged stool he used for cooking. He brought it back. He placed it on the floor near her bed. He was careful to keep it on his side of the invisible line, but it was close. He sat down, his back to the wall. He said nothing. He did not look at her. He stared at the dark, canvas-covered window, listening to the storm die. Clara turned her head, just enough to see him. He was a silhouette against the faint orange glow from the stove's grate, a big, quiet, unmoving shape. He was not a threat. He was just there. She pulled the quilt tighter, her breathing still ragged, a series of hitched, painful gasps. He sat. He did not move. He did not sleep. He sat as the thunder rumbled away south, as the wind eased its scream to a low moan. He sat as the first gray, snow-heavy light of dawn began to bleed through the canvas. He sat until her breathing, which had been so full of terror, finally slowed, deepened, and fell into the even, quiet rhythm of a true, dreamless sleep. Only then did Eli Carver stand, his joints cracking in the cold. He looked down at her one last time, her face pale and slack in the dim light. Then he turned and went to make the coffee. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet. The world was muffled in a new, deep layer of snow. Inside the cabin, the air was stale with the ghosts of the night, the smell of fear and the bitter, metallic tang of old confessions. Clara awoke slowly, her body stiff with cold, her head aching. She had a confused memory of screaming, of fighting the blankets, of him. She opened her eyes. He was not on his stool. She bolted upright, her heart seizing. The cabin was empty. The door was shut. His bedroll was gone. His rifle was gone. He had left. He had heard her story, the ugly, shameful truth of her, and he had left. She was alone again, truly alone, with the snow and the rats and the memory of that lightning. A new, colder despair than any she had yet known washed over her. Then the door opened. Eli Carver ducked inside, shaking a heavy load of snow from his hat. He was carrying a full bucket of water in one hand and his rifle in the other. He did not look at her. He just moved to the stove, put the water on to heat, and began to shave tinder from a dry log. He had not left. He had been working. Clara pulled the quilt around her, her shame as sharp as the cold. He had sat watch over her. He had listened to her terror. And now he was making coffee. The simple domestic act felt like a judgment. I am sorry, she whispered to his back. For the screaming. Eli grunted. He fed the tinder to the coals. The storm was loud. It was a dismissal, an offer of an excuse. It was not the storm, she said, her voice stronger. She had to. The secret was out, raw and festering in the small room. She could not pretend it was not. He stopped, his hand halfway to the kindling box. He did not turn. You said they marked you, she continued, her voice trembling. For justice. Eli's back went rigid. He stayed that way for a long time, so long that Clara thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, rough sound, like stones scraping together. Justice, he said, tasting the word. Justice is what men with more rope than sense call it. My brother, Jacob. He found out about their justice. He turned. Then he looked at her, his eyes flat and gray as the sky. You are not the only one who came here with ghosts, ma'am. He walked to the canvas-covered window, pushing the tarp aside just an inch, letting a sliver of blinding white light cut the gloom. I was riding back from Wyoming. I had been in a range war. It was ugly. It was enough. I was tired of killing, tired of the whole damn business. I had not seen Jacob in 6 years. I heard he was up here, trapping. I thought I would come see him, maybe sit a winter. He let the canvas fall, plunging the room back into darkness. He sat on his stool by the stove, but he was not looking at the fire. He was looking at the roof beam, right above Clara's bed. I found him, he said. His voice was empty of all emotion. Right there. He pointed at the beam, hanging from his own porch. They did not even bother to use a tree. They used his own roof. Clara put a hand over her mouth. I cut him down, Eli said, his eyes still fixed on that spot. I had seen a lot of dead men. I had made a few, but this, he shook his head, a small, violent motion. They had left him, as a message. He had been there a week, maybe more. Who? Clara whispered. Why? Land, Eli said. The word was a curse. The same reason for every fight, a local rancher, Amos Finch. He runs cattle in the valley. He decided this stretch was his, said Jacob was squatting. But you said the deed. Jacob had the deed, filed and proper. But Finch had more men, more guns, and more friends in town. So they had a meeting. They decided Jacob was a thief. They called it justice. They left a notice nailed to his door. Eli looked down at his own hands. I buried him, up on the ridge, under the pines. Then I rode to town. I asked the marshal. The marshal, he told me it was a closed matter. He told me to keep writing, unless I wanted to end up just as closed." He was quiet. The only sound was the bubble of the water as it began to heat. "I did not keep writing," he said. "I came back here. I thought I would. Wait out the winter. Fix the place. Show them. But I could not stay. Him. Hanging there. I saw it every time I closed my eyes." He looked at Clara, his gaze finally meeting hers. "I saw it until last night. When I heard you." He did not have to explain. She understood. He had not just been sitting watch for her, he had been sitting watch with her. They were two ghosts, trapped in the same small, cold room, guarding the graves of their own pasts. The silence that settled was different. The invisible line was still there, but it was no longer a border. It was a shared scar. Several days passed. The strange, fragile truce held. They spoke more. Not much, but more. He asked her if she could mend a tear in his canvas coat. She asked him if he had any more shot for the rabbits. The words were simple, but they were bridges. The cold deepened. The food ran low. The jerky was gone. The beans were a handful at the bottom of a sack. Eli grew restless. His anger at the weather, at Finch, at his own predicament, simmering just below the surface. He had to find meat. "The snow is too deep," Clara said, watching him check his rifle. "You will not find anything." "I will find something," he said, his jaw set, "or I will dig for it." He was gone all day. Clara stayed in the cabin, mending. She restitched the lining of his glove. Her small, neat stitches a contrast to the rough, waxed thread he had used. She found herself watching the door. The anxiety was a cold knot in her stomach. Before, his absence would have been a relief. Now, it was a threat. He was the axe. He was the rifle. He was the one who knew how to keep the stove from smoking. He was her shelter. The light began to fail. The deep purple shadows of the high country dusk filled the cabin. He was not back. She began to pace, a small, frantic track from the bed to the stove. She was a fool. She had let herself depend on him. Just as true dark fell, the door was flung open. Eli stumbled in, a gust of snow and freezing air filling the room. He was empty-handed. There was no game. "Eli," she said, moving toward him. He pushed past her, not even seeing her. "Damn it all!" he roared, and he slammed his fist against the log wall. It was a terrifying, contained explosion of rage. "What is it?" she asked, her voice small. "What is wrong?" He went to the stove, hunched over it, breathing hard. He was holding his left hand against his chest. "Eli, you are hurt." "I am fine," he snarled. He fumbled with the glove on his left hand, his face pale and tight in the firelight. He could not get it off. His fingers were too stiff. With a curse, he gripped the glove with his teeth and tore it off. Clara gasped. The tips of his first two fingers, the index in the middle, were not red. They were a pale, waxy, terrifying white. "Frostbite," he muttered, disgust in his voice. "Like a greenhorn. I fell in a drift, lost the glove. Took me 10 minutes to find it." He looked around, wild-eyed, and grabbed the bucket of snow she kept for water. He plunged his hand in. "No!" Clara's voice was sharp. A command. He froze, looking at her in surprise. "Not snow," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You will lose them. You will get gangrene. My father, I saw it. You need water, lukewarm, now." He stared at her, this wisp of a woman, giving him orders, but he saw the certainty in her eyes. He knew she was right. She was already moving. She grabbed the pot, dumped half the snow, and put it on the stove, pushing it into the hottest part of the fire. "Get the other bucket," she commanded. "The one with the ice. Break it." He obeyed. He grabbed the axe, smashed the ice in the water bucket, and poured the frigid water into the pot of melting snow. Clara, her own hands raw, dipped her fingers in. "More cold," she said. He added more. She tested it again. "Stop, that is it." She brought the pot and set it on the floor in front of him. "Put your hand in, slowly." He hesitated. This was an intimacy, a surrender. He was the one who fixed things. He was the one who was strong. "Eli," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "Please." He slowly, grimly lowered his white fingers into the gray, lukewarm water. The pain, when it came, was immediate and astonishing. It was not a burning, it was a deep, electric, agonizing ache, as if his bones were being crushed. He hissed, pulling his hand back. "No, you must," she said. She knelt in front of him. She took his wrist. He flinched. It was not from the pain. Her hand was small, surprisingly warm, and firm on his skin. He recoiled from the touch itself. It was the first contact he had felt from her, from anyone. That was not violence or duty. It was care. Clara stopped, her hand hovering. "Did I hurt you?" "No," he said, his voice a rasp. He would not look at her. He stared at the pot. "It is the water." She knew he was lying. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt when the thunder cracked. It was a fear of being touched, a fear of being known. Very gently, so lightly he almost could not feel it. She put her hand on his forearm, well above the water. "Keep it in," she whispered. "I am here." She stayed there, kneeling on the cold dirt floor. While he soaked his hand, she did not speak. She just kept her small hand on his arm, a steady, warm pressure. He watched, mesmerized, as the dead white of his fingers slowly, agonizingly, turned a mottled red, then a deep, angry purple. The pain was immense, but the strange, quiet pressure of her hand on his arm was louder. The boundaries were gone. They had been washed away in lukewarm water and shared pain. The days that followed, the cabin was smaller. The invisible line was a joke. He woke one morning, the light still gray, and saw her dressing. She was standing by the stove, her back to him, pulling her patched dress over her head. He saw the line of her spine, the pale shadow of her shoulder blade, and, for a second, the angry, puckered scar of the brand. He saw the curve of her waist. He felt a sudden, sharp jolt of something, not just pity, hunger. He shut his eyes, turning his face to the wall. He felt a deep, profound shame. She was not. She was a woman in his care. He was no better than the men in her town. She brushed past him to get the coffee. The cabin was 12 feet wide. There was no way to move without touching. Her arm grazed his chest. "Excuse me?" she murmured. He grunted, not moving. He could smell her. She smelled of wood smoke and soap, the harsh lye soap she had made, and something else. Something just female. It was maddening. He noticed everything. He noticed the way she now combed her hair, tying it back with a strip of leather. He noticed the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating on her sewing. He noticed the swell of her breast under the thin calico as she bent to the fire. He kept his back to her. He chopped wood with a fury, trying to sweat the thoughts out of him. He pretended not to notice. And he knew, with a grim certainty, that she pretended not to notice him. The rickety pine bed had been bothering him. One of the posts was loose, a casualty of his first night, and it squeaked and groaned every time she moved. It was a constant reminder of her presence. One afternoon, while she was outside, bravely attempting to set a snare, he took his hammer and some fresh rope lashing. He was not going to tolerate his brother's lazy work any longer. He pounded the post back into place, relashed the joints, and reinforced the frame. He worked with an angry, focused energy. When she came back in, empty-handed and blue with cold, he was just finishing. He yanked on the bedpost. It was solid. It did not move. Clara stood by the door, watching him. She rubbed her hands together. "Well," she said, her voice quiet. He turned, wiping his brow. Surprised she had spoken. A small, hesitant smile touched the corners of her mouth. "That is one solid thing in this room. Anyway." He stared at her. "The stove wobbles," she went on, a tiny, strange note of humor in her voice. "The table is missing a leg, and, well," she gestured from herself to him, "we are not exactly solid." He was not a man who smiled. The muscles for it were stiff, unused, but he felt something pull at the corner of his mouth. It was a short, rough exhale, a sound that was almost a laugh. It was a smile. Clara saw it. It was like watching a crack form in granite. It was there for a second, a brief, shocking flash of the man he might have been, and then it was gone. But it had happened. The peace was shattered 2 days later. They were eating. It was a rare, good meal. Eli had finally shot a small deer, and the cabin was filled with the rich smell of roasting venison. It was almost domestic. They sat at the wobbly table, sharing the pot. Eli's rifle, as always, was across his lap. A sound from outside, horses, more than one, moving with purpose. Eli was on his feet in an instant, the rifle in his hands, leveled at the door. "Get to the bed," he ordered. Clara scrambled away, her heart pounding. "Hello, the cabin." The voice was loud, arrogant, and chillingly familiar. Eli pulled the door open just enough to see. Clara peeked from behind the bed frame. It was Amos Finch. He was on a big black horse, flanked by 2 other men. His face, visible even from the cabin, was still bruised a sick yellow and purple. "Carver." Finch boomed. He saw the rifle. "Not very neighborly. I come visiting, and you point a gun at me." "You are not my neighbor, Finch," Eli said. His voice was flat. "And you are not welcome. I told you what would happen if you came back." Finch laughed, a short, ugly bark. "I ain't on your land. Not yet. I just came to see how you were. Settling in. Heard you had a hard winter." He leered, looking past Eli, trying to see into the dark cabin. "Heard you had company." Clara shrank back. "Word gets around. Carver, trapper came through town. Said he saw smoke and company. Said you were holed up with that little runaway harlot." Clara shut her eyes. The word, it followed her. It would always follow her. "Get off my property," Eli said. The words were low, almost a whisper, but they carried more menace than a shout. "I'm just worried about you, Carver," Finch said, his voice dripping with false concern. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "It is a bad thing for a man to be alone, but it is worse, shacking up with that kind of trash. A woman who gets run out of her own town. A woman who—" He did not finish. Eli's move was a blur. It was not a barroom swing. It was the calculated, brutal violence of the range war. He did not drop the rifle. He used it. He took 1 step forward and, holding the rifle in one hand, swung his right fist in a tight, vicious arc. His knuckles, still healing, connected with Finch's mouth. The sound was a wet, solid crack. Finch was knocked clean out of the saddle, a spray of blood and broken teeth exploding from his mouth. He hit the snow and did not move. His 2 men, stunned, reached for their guns. The click-clack of Eli chambering around on the Winchester froze them. "Touch it," Eli invited, the rifle leveled at the nearest man's chest. "Please." The men raised their hands. Eli looked down at Finch, who was groaning, spitting blood into the white snow. "I am not my brother," Eli said, his voice shaking with a rage so cold it burned. "I told you, I am not a farmer. I am not a trapper. You come here again. I will not use my fist. I will plant you on this hill next to him." He kicked Finch's rifle, which had fallen from its scabbard, deep into a snowdrift. Get him and get out." The men scrambled from their horses, hauled their groaning boss up, and dumped him back onto his saddle. One of them glared at Eli with pure hatred. "You will pay for this. Carver." "Put it on my bill," Eli said. He stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, and watched them ride away. He watched until they were just dark specks in the white. He shut the door, the bar falling with a heavy, final thud. He turned. The cabin was silent. Clara was still by the bed, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else. He looked at his hand. His knuckles were split open again, bleeding freely onto the dirt floor. He was trembling. Clara did not move. He did not move. They just stared at each other across the room. He had not just hit a man. He had defended her. He had taken her shame and answered it with violence. He walked to the stove. His shoulders slumped. The rage was gone, leaving him hollow. He sat on the stool, his back to her, and looked at his bleeding hand. He did not know what to do. He heard her move. He heard her steps on the dirt floor. She was crossing the room. She was crossing the line. She stopped, not beside him, but in front of him. She knelt. "Let me," she whispered. He did not move. He let her take his hand. It was the second time. She got the basin, the lukewarm water, the clean rag. She did not look at his face. She focused on the wound. Her touch was impossibly light. She cleaned the blood, the mix of his and Finch's. He was watching her. He was watching the way her dark eyelashes feathered on her cheek. He was watching the pulse in her throat. She finished wrapping the hand. She had used a clean strip torn from her own flour sack patches. Her hands were still resting on his. He looked from her hands to her face. He was afraid. He was not afraid of Amos Finch. He was not afraid of the winter. He was terrified of this feeling, this warmth. Clara looked up. She saw the fear in his eyes. It was the same fear she had seen when she touched his frostbitten hand. It was the fear of a man in a locked room, who has just had someone pick the lock. She understood it. She did not let go of his hand. Instead, slowly, deliberately, she took his wounded hand, the one she was holding, and she raised it. She placed it on her waist. He froze. His entire body went rigid. His rough, bloody knuckles were a brand against the thin calico. He could feel the warmth of her body, the shape of her. He tried to pull his hand away. She held it firm. She leaned closer, so close he could feel her breath on his cheek. "You have got nothing to be afraid of," she whispered. Her voice was shaking, but it was fierce. "Not from me." He stared at her, his eyes wide. He did not know what to do. He did not know how. So she did. She leaned in the last few inches. She pressed her mouth to his. It was not a soft kiss. It was desperate. It was chapped lips and the taste of salt and blood and coffee. It was two people who had been starving for so long they had forgotten what food tasted in. It was a question and an answer all at once. Eli was stone. He was frozen. He trembled, a violent full-body tremor. And then his other hand, his good hand, came up. It was slow, hesitant. He did not grab her. He did not pull her. He rested it on the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in the soft, messy hair at her nape. He kissed her back. It was awkward. It was hesitant. It was a man remembering a language he had not spoken in a decade. Then the hunger took over. Not the hunger for food, the hunger for life, for warmth, for another human soul in the unending, hostile cold. He kissed her deeply, pulling her closer. A drowning man taking his first breath. The room, the cold, the dead brother, and the men who were coming. It all dissolved, leaving only this. The morning after the kiss was a new kind of cold. The air in the cabin was thick with unspoken things. They had crossed a line, a desperate, clumsy stumble, and now neither knew where to stand. Eli rose before her, his guilt a sour taste in his mouth. He had been a brute. He had taken advantage of her gratitude, of the violence of the moment. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his rifle, and fled the cabin without a word, not even stopping to make coffee. He needed the cold. He needed the sharp, clean bite of the air to clear his head. He went to check his traps. The silence of the woods was wrong. He found the first snare. It was gone. The sapling he had bent for it was snapped in two, the wire missing. He found the second, a rabbit snare. It was also gone. He walked the half-mile to his main trap, a deadfall he had spent a day constructing. It was smashed, not by a bear, by an axe. Someone had systematically, gleefully destroyed it. Finch, or Finch's men. The rage, the cold, simmering rage that lived just beneath his skin, returned. This was not a warning. This was a declaration. He returned to the cabin, his long strides angry. He saw the wisp of smoke from the chimney. She was awake. He did not know what he would say to her. He was 20 yards from the door when he heard a sound from inside. A sharp thwack, followed by Clara's terrified scream. He ran, bursting through the door, his rifle up. She was huddled against the far wall, her hands over her head. The cabin was filled with a spray of ice and snow. In the middle of the floor lay a rock, the size of a man's fist. He looked at the window. The canvas tarp he had nailed up was torn, a jagged hole ripped in the center. They were right outside. Clara panted, her eyes wide with the same terror he had seen during the thunderstorm. I heard them laugh. Eli moved to the window, peering through the hole. He saw nothing, just tracks in the snow, leading away. 2, maybe 3 men. They were gone. They had struck and run, like cowards. He will not stop, Clara whispered, her voice breaking. Finch, he will not stop. She was shaking, her whole body trembling. We have to go. Eli, we have to leave. This is what they do. They will not stop until... No, his voice was flat. You do not understand, she cried, desperation making her voice high. They will come back. They will. They will burn us out. They will do what they did in Kentucky. We have to run. I said no. He turned to her, his face a granite mask. I am done running. I ran from Wyoming. I ran from this cabin when I buried Jacob. I am not running again. But they will kill us. Let them try, he said. He walked to the wall where Jacob's useless tools hung. He found a few loose planks. He grabbed his hammer. They want to fight. I will give them one. He did not just fix the window. He boarded it up. He took the warped planks from an old crate and nailed them over the canvas, pounding the nails with a grim, rhythmic finality. Each hammer blow was a punctuation mark. We are not leaving. When he was done, the last sliver of natural light was gone. The cabin was a fortress. It was a tomb. He lit the lantern, the small, oily flame casting huge, dancing shadows. He looked at Clara. She was huddled on the bed, her face pale. She looked beaten. Get up, he said. She flinched. Get up, he repeated, his voice softer, but still firm. He took his Winchester and held it out to her. But first, if you are going to stay, you are going to learn. She stared at the gun as if it were a snake. I have never... I know, he said. That is why I am teaching you. They come back. I might be outside. I might be busy. You will not scream. You will not hide. You will fight. She took the rifle. The weight of it surprised her, nearly pulling her arms down. It was heavy, oiled steel and walnut, smelling of powder and cold. It is too heavy, she whispered. It is, he agreed. But it is all we have. Stand here. He moved her to the far wall, facing the door. He stood behind her. His presence was a wall of heat. Put the stock here, he said, his voice low in her ear. He touched her shoulder, his calloused fingers firm, positioning the rifle butt against the hollow. Not loose. Hold it tight, tighter, or it will break your collarbone. She pressed it back, wincing. Hold it up. He put his large hand under the forestock, lifting it, forcing her to take the weight. You do not aim. Not in here. There is no time. You point. He adjusted her left hand. You wrap your finger around the trigger. Not yet. Just feel it. His hands were on hers. He was teaching her to kill. The intimacy of it was more profound, more terrifying than the kiss. He was sharing the darkest part of himself, the part that had survived the range war. When they come through that door, he said, his voice a low rumble, you do not think, you do not warn them. You pull the trigger, and you keep pulling it until it is empty. Eli, she trembled. Do it, he said. What? Dry fire it. Just pull the trigger. She hesitated, then squeezed. The click of the hammer falling in the small, dark room was deafening. Again, he said. He worked the lever, ejecting nothing. Again. Click. Again. Click. He did it a dozen times, until the tremor in her arms was from muscle strain, not fear. Good, he said, stepping back. The warmth of his body left her, and the cold rushed in. We will do this every day. Life in the boarded-up cabin became a shared siege. They were two soldiers in a foxhole. The darkness changed them. Their senses grew sharper. Every scrape on the roof, every moan of the wind, made them freeze, their eyes meeting in the lantern light. The world shrank to the 12 feet of packed earth, the smell of wood smoke, old stew, and their own unwashed bodies. They moved around each other with a new, practiced economy. The boundaries blurred completely, not with passion, but with grim necessity. They developed a language of survival. Clara, refusing to be a burden, took charge of the domestic world. She made it a world of defiance. She learned to make coffee by melting snow in a pot, letting the ground settle for an hour. It was a terrible, bitter brew, but it was hot, and it was theirs. You are wasting firewood, Eli had grumbled the first time. No, she had said, not looking up. I am making coffee. He had said nothing. He just drank the cup she handed him. He, in turn, taught her. His boots were failing. The sole of his right boot was flapping. A wound from his fight with the snow. He sat by the fire, took out his leatherworking kit, the awl, the waxed thread, the needle. You can sew, he said. It was not a question. This is the same, just harder. He showed her how to punch the holes with the awl, how to follow the old stitches, how to pull the thread so tight it bit into the leather. You have to mean it, he said. She took it. Her small, frost-chapped fingers struggled with the thick needle, but she did it. She sat for hours, her head bent in the firelight, mending his boot. He watched her, the needle pulling through, a slow, patient, stubborn act. She was not just mending his boot, she was mending his ability to walk, to hunt, to stay. One morning, the fragile peace broke. The weather had cleared, the first true cold snap, and the air was still. Eli went out to hunt, his rifle in one hand, his mended boot crunching on the hard-packed snow. He did not get far. He saw it, nailed to the big pine where he tethered Bess, a tattered, stained envelope. His blood went cold. He tore it from the tree. The nail was new. It was addressed, in crude block letters, to Occupant, Carver Cabin. He ripped it open. It was a single sheet of paper, printed with the seal of the county clerk. It looked official. It looked legal. It was a notice to evict. It cited his brother's defunct claim, a prior lien filed by Amos Finch, and a county ordinance against unlawful occupation of unsettled lands. But it was the last line that stopped his heart. Oh, and further cause for eviction being the cohabitation with one Clara Rourke, a woman of known ill repute, whose presence constitutes a moral nuisance. He read it 3 times. He felt the blood rise, a hot, dark tide in his neck. Finch had not just attacked his traps. He had not just thrown a rock. He had used the law. He had used her. He had taken her shame and made it a legal weapon. He stormed back to the cabin. The paper crumpled in his fist. He kicked the door open. "Clara!" She jumped, seeing his face. "What is it? Did you see them?" He did not speak. He smoothed the paper and thrust it at her. She took it, her eyes scanning the page. He watched her face. He watched it go from confusion to fear to a pale, bloodless white. She read the last line, the words, "ill repute," and her hand began to shake. He expected her to cry. He expected her to collapse. He expected her to say, "I told you we should run." She did not. She stood very still for a long moment. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then, she slowly, deliberately, folded the paper. "He is smart," she whispered, her voice a low, hard rasp he had never heard before. "He is a dead man," Eli growled, reaching for his ammunition belt. "No." She put her hand on his arm. "That is what he wants. He wants you to ride into town with a gun. He wants the marshal to have a reason. You will be in a cell or dead, and he will have the cabin. He will win." "He has a reason," Eli said, his voice tight. "Not this way." She looked at the paper, then at him, her eyes clear and cold. "He is using me. He is calling me a whore to steal your land. He thinks I am your weakness." She took a deep breath. "He is wrong. I am your defense." "What are you talking about?" "This paper," she said, tapping it. "It is for occupant and Clara Rourke, a squatter and his woman. They have no rights." She looked him straight in the eye. "But a wife does—" "Mrs. Eli Carver is not a woman of ill repute. She is a landowner. She is your partner. This paper—" She crumpled it in her own fist. "This paper means nothing, if I am your wife." Eli stared at her. The audacity of it, the simple, brutal, perfect logic. "Clara," he began, "you do not—" "I am not asking for a marriage," she said, stumbling over the word, a faint flush on her cheeks. "I am not a fool. I am talking about the law. I am talking about survival. Your brother's deed. Your name. My presence. We marry. We go to the county seat, not this town, but the seat. We file on the land as a family, as Mr. and Mrs. Eli Carver. We build a wall of paper so high Finch cannot climb it." She was not the starving creature he had found. She was not the weeping woman in the storm. She was a general. She was a fighter. She had taken his rifle, and now she was taking his name. He looked at her, this small, bruised woman, and he felt a surge of something. It was not pity. It was not desire. It was respect. "He will not like it," Eli said, a slow, cold smile touching his lips. "I am counting on it," she said. He nodded, once. "Tomorrow, we ride to town." The walk to town was a march into enemy territory. They did not ride. The mare, Bess, was too weak to carry them both that far, and he would not leave her alone. They walked the miles in the snow, Eli in the lead, his rifle in the crook of his arm, Clara just behind him. They did not speak. The pact had been made. The town, when they reached it, looked like a trap, gray, smoky, huddled under the vast, cold mountains. As they walked down the main street, the few people out in the cold stopped. They stared. Doors opened. Faces appeared in windows. The whispers were immediate, a physical wave of sound. "And that is Carver, the one who—" "I'd look at her. That is the one. The harlot from Kentucky. Shameless. Walking right down the street." Eli's hand tightened on his rifle. He did not look at them. He looked straight ahead. Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter, her head held high, her eyes fixed on Eli's back. They went to the justice of the peace. His name was Davies. He was a small man with a stained vest and cold, judgmental eyes. He was, Eli knew, a friend of Amos Finch. "Well," Davies said, not bothering to smile. "Carver, what do you want?" "A marriage," Eli said, his voice flat. Davies's eyes widened. He looked from Eli to Clara, and a slow, ugly smile spread on his face. Marriage? Well, is that so?" He knew. He had seen the notice. "Going to make an honest woman of her, are you?" Eli took one step toward the desk. "You are paid by the county," he said, his voice a low threat. "You will do your job, or I will file a complaint with the territorial governor. Get the book." The smile vanished. Davies knew a threat when he heard one. He was a coward. He grumbled, but he got the book. The ceremony was a humiliation. It took less than a minute. Davies read the words in a fast, bored monotone. He did not look at them. He looked at the stove. "Do you, Eli Carver, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Clara Rourke, take this man?" "I do." "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife. Sign here." They signed. Eli's hand, large and rough. Clara's small, neat and trembling. "That will be $2, Davies said. Eli slapped $2 silver on the desk. "We are done." They walked out. The street was no longer empty. A small crowd had gathered. Men from the saloon, women from the general store. They were silent, watching. It was the silence of a public shaming. They were halfway to the edge of town when it happened. A group of boys, brave with the backing of the saloon men, darted out. "Hey, Carver," one yelled. "Here is a wedding present from Mr. Finch." A dark object flew through the air. Clara saw it coming but had no time to move. It was a rotten apple. It struck her square on the shoulder, splattering her patched dress with a cold, foul-smelling pulp. Clara cried out, a small, sharp sound. Eli's hand went to the colt at his hip. He had worn it. He had known. He turned, his eyes black with a killing rage. "Do not," Clara whispered, grabbing his arm. "Please, Eli, it is what they want. Do not." He looked at the men in front of the saloon, who were laughing. He looked at the boys, already scattering. He looked at the stain on her dress. He took a deep breath, the air burning his lungs. He put his arm around Clara's shoulders, pulling her against his side. He turned his back on the town, shielding her, and he walked. He did not run. He walked, slowly, deliberately, forcing them through the gauntlet of hatred. The walk back was worse than the walk there. The humiliation was a cold, sick thing in the pit of Clara's stomach. She kept rubbing at the stain on her dress, her head down. She had done this for the land, but she was still the harlot. She had just made him a harlot's husband. They were miles from town. The silence was broken only by the crunch of their boots. Eli stopped. Clara, wrapped in her own misery, walked a few steps before realizing he was not beside her. She stopped and turned. He was standing in the snow, watching her. His face was unreadable. He looked at the stain on her dress. He looked at her face, pale and streaked with tears she had refused to let fall in town. He looked at her hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists. He stepped toward her. She flinched, expecting she did not know what. He did not speak. He just reached out his right hand, his scarred, wounded hand. He did not grab her arm. He did not touch her shoulder. He took her hand. He slid his rough, calloused fingers between hers, folding them into a grip that was not hard, but was unbreakable. Clara stared at their joined hands. It was the first time he had done it, the first time he had initiated any touch that was not for fighting or fixing. It was not a gesture of passion. It was an answer. It was a bond. He tugged, gently. "Come on," he said. His voice was rough. Wife. He said the word. It hung in the cold air, heavy and strange. He did not let go. He held her hand for the rest of the walk home. They reached the cabin as dusk fell. The darkness inside felt, for the first time, like a sanctuary. He barred the door, the sound a final thud that shut out the world. They were safe. They were married. The tension in the cabin was unbearable. It was their wedding night. A joke, a legal contract. Clara moved to the stove. Her old routine, she would make coffee. "Clara," he said. She stopped, her back to him. "Do not," he said. She turned. He was standing by the small table, his hat in his hands. He looked lost. "This is," he began. "It was for the land." "I know," she whispered. "You should take the bed. It is yours." "Where will you sleep?" "The floor, by the stove. It is fine." He was already moving toward his bedroll. "No." He stopped. "It is foolish," she said, her voice shaking, "to sleep on the cold floor. We are man and wife." She said the words, tasting them. He looked at his bedroll. He looked at the bed, the one he had fixed, the one they had both slept in their terror. He did not move. He was afraid. He was terrified of this. Clara saw it. It was the same fear she had seen when she touched his hand. The fear of being vulnerable. She walked to the bed. She sat on the edge, her hands in her lap. She did not lie down. She did not take off her dress. She just sat, claiming the space. An invitation. He watched her. He saw the stain on her dress. He saw the courage it had taken for her to walk into that town. He saw the woman who had offered him a way to fight back. Slowly, as if moving a great weight, he picked up his bedroll. He walked to the bed. He did not put it on the floor. He laid it out on the straw tick, next to where she sat. He sat beside her. The straw rustled. They were side by side, not touching, staring at the fire. "Clara," he said, his voice a rasp. "What you did today, in town." "It was for the land," she repeated, almost defensively. "It was brave," he said. She looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was staring at his hands. "I am tired of being cold, Eli," she whispered. It was not about the weather. He turned his head. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the bruises under her eyes. He saw the strength in the set of her mouth. He saw the woman who had faced him down with a rifle, who had tended his wounds, who had offered him her name. It was not necessity. It was not the law. It was want, a deep, aching human want, to not be alone. He reached out, his hand hesitating, just as it had before. He touched her face, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. She did not flinch. She leaned into his touch. He leaned in. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, bloody kiss of that first night. It was slow. It was hesitant. It was a question. She kissed him back. It was an answer. They lay down, two people still carrying the heavy weight of their pasts, two people still marked by bruises, seen and unseen. They did not rush. They moved slowly, carefully, as if handling something infinitely fragile and precious. They found solace in the warmth, a quiet, desperate, and daring act of feeling, a claim made not on a piece of paper or a plot of land, but on each other. The thin gray light of dawn was different. It no longer separated them. Eli woke with a start, his hand reaching for the Colt before he was fully conscious. But the shape beside him was just Clara, her breathing low and even. They were tangled in the one set of blankets, her back pressed against his chest for warmth. It was a new world. The line was gone. When he rose to build the fire, he moved with a new quiet, a new purpose. He was no longer just stoking a stove to keep from freezing. He was warming a home. He was warming her. When she woke, she did not retreat to the far side of the room. She watched him, her eyes dark in the lantern light. She took the cup of coffee he offered, their fingers brushing, a simple, domestic act that felt more profound than the desperate passion of the night before. They did not speak of it. They spoke of the weather. They spoke of the dwindling flour sack, but their voices were different. The brittle edge was gone. They had been married 3 days. 3 days of this strange, fragile peace. They were a unit, a 2-person army waiting for the next shot. It came in the dead of night, in the deepest part of the cold. Eli was woken by the sound. It was not a human sound. It was the high, terrified scream of a horse. "Bess," he breathed. He was out of the bed in one motion, pulling on his boots, his gun belt already in his hand. "Eli, what is it?" Clara was sitting up, clutching the blanket. "Stay inside," he commanded. "Bar the door behind me." He did not wait for an answer. He ripped the bar from the door and plunged into the night. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but the air was not clean. It was thick with the gut-wrenching smell of kerosene, and it was bright. The small, rickety barn, it was little more than a lean-to against the trees where he kept the mare and their precious, dwindling stores, was a pillar of fire. The orange flames roared into the black sky, casting frantic, dancing shadows on the snow. Bess was trapped, screaming, her eyes white with terror, kicking at the burning post she was tethered to. "No!" Eli roared. He ran, not for the supplies, but for the horse. The heat was scorching, peeling the skin from his face. He pulled his knife, cutting the tether in one blind. Desperate slash. He slapped the mare's rump, a hard, violent blow. "Go! Get!" The mare bolted, a streak of terror, disappearing into the dark woods. Only then did Eli turn to the fire. It was too late. The whole structure was engulfed. The hay he had spent weeks cutting and drying, the last sack of oats, his saddle, and, worst of all, the smoked venison, the meat that was meant to see them through the winter. It was all going up in a torrent of sparks. Clara was at the door, her face a pale mask of horror. "Eli!" "Get the bucket!" he yelled. "The water!" It was a fool's errand. It was like spitting on a furnace. He grabbed the snow bucket, she grabbed the water pot, and they ran, slipping and falling in the icy snow, throwing useless splashes of water against a wall of flame. He tried. He fought it with a desperate, primal rage, using a snow-laden branch to beat at the edges. But the kerosene had done its work. The fire was too hot, too fast. They lost. He stopped, his lungs burning, his hands raw. He stood, helpless, and watched it burn. He watched their winter, their survival, turn to black smoke and ash. It was Finch's answer to their marriage. They stood there until the roof collapsed. A final, whooshing explosion of sparks. Then there was only a bed of glowing, angry coals, hissing in the snow. The night was silent again, save for Eli's ragged breathing. "Go inside, Clara," he said. His voice was dead. "Your hands," she whispered. He looked down. He had not even noticed. They were red and blistering. "It does not matter. Go inside." She obeyed. He stood alone in the snow for another hour, watching the last embers die, the cold seeping back into his bones. He was not just cold. He was empty. He went back into the cabin at dawn. Clara was sitting at the table, her hands wrapped around an empty cup. She had not slept. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. He said nothing. He went to the door, took his rifle, and walked back out into the gray light. He went to the wreckage. The air stank of wet, charred wood. He kicked at a smoking beam. He had to see. He had to know. Clara followed him. She had pulled his heavy canvas coat over her dress. She stood a few feet back, watching him sift through the ashes. His saddle was a lump of twisted leather and hot metal. The sacks of food were just black, smoking patches on the ground. It was Clara who saw it first. On a piece of timber that had been thrown clear, a flat piece of pine, something was scrawled. It was written in charcoal, in the same crude, blocky letters as the eviction notice. She knelt, brushing the snow from it. "Whore wife," she read aloud, her voice a thin, cracked whisper. "Go home." Eli stopped. He turned. He looked at the words. He looked at her, kneeling in the snow, her hair wild, her face smudged with soot. He looked at the words one more time. "Whore wife." Something inside him, a cold, hard, patient thing, finally broke. He did not speak. He turned and walked back to the cabin, his steps deliberate. "Eli!" Clara called, scrambling to her feet. He was inside before she reached the door. He was not tending his wounds. He was not making coffee. He was at his bedroll, pulling out his ammunition belt. He checked the loads in his Colt, spinning the cylinder. He strapped the belt around his waist. He picked up his rifle. "Eli, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice high with a new, sharper terror. "He called you my wife," Eli said, his voice a low, terrifying monotone. "He burned my barn. He is a dead man. I am going to town. I am going to kill Amos Finch." He started for the door. Clara flew across the room and threw herself in front of it, her arms spread wide, her back pressed against the wood. "No!" she panted. "Get out of the way, Clara." "No," she cried. "You cannot. That is what he wants. You know it is." "I do not care what he wants. Get out of the way." He grabbed her arm to move her. "No!" she shrieked, fighting him, her hands grabbing the front of his shirt. "Eli, please, listen to me. You ride into town with that gun. You are a dead man. The marshal will shoot you on sight, or Finch will, and the marshal will call it self-defense. He will win. They will win." "He burned us out," he roared, the rage finally breaking free, his voice echoing in the small, dark room. "He is starving us. What do you want me to do? Sit here and wait?" "I want you to live," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. I... Her voice broke, a desperate, tearing sob. "I just married you. You cannot make me a widow. Not again. Please, Eli, do not leave me. Do not make me lose you too." Her words, the raw, terrified plea, cut through the red haze of his rage. He stopped. He stared at her, this small, fierce woman clinging to his shirt, her face a mask of desperation. She was not just afraid of him, she was afraid for him. The strength drained out of his arms. He let go of her. His shoulders slumped. The rifle felt impossibly heavy. He backed away, sinking onto the stool by the stove. He put his head in his hands, his whole body shaking with the force of the contained violence. "He wins," Eli whispered, his voice muffled. "He wins. He burns us out. He starves us. And I do nothing. No." He looked up. Clara was wiping her face, her hands still shaking. But her eyes were hard. The terror was gone, replaced by the same cold, clear calculation he had seen when she proposed the marriage. "He does not win," she said, her voice low. "You were right. You are not your brother. You are a fighter, but you fight with this." She pointed to his rifle. I have to fight with this." She went to the small, hidden stack of Jacob's papers he kept in a tin box. She pulled out the two items that mattered: the original, filed deed to the land, and the marriage certificate, the one from the hateful justice of the peace. "He wants to fight with paper," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He wants to fight with the law. So we will fight with the law." "It is his law," Eli said, his voice hollow. "His town, his marshal." "Not his county," Clara said. "That notice he sent. It had the county seal, but it came from his men. It was a fraud. We have the real deed. We have a real marriage. And now," she looked toward the smoldering ruin of the barn, "now we have proof of what he will do." "What are you saying?" "I am saying we do not go to the marshal. We go to the county seat. We go to the territorial judge. We file a formal claim against Amos Finch for harassment, for destruction of property, for arson." He stared at her. "The county seat is 40 miles away. Through the snow, we have one horse. We have no food." "We have one horse," she corrected, "and I know how to ride." A cold dread settled over him, worse than the rage. "No, absolutely not." "You have to listen to me, Eli," she said, kneeling in front of him, forcing him to look at her. "You are right. We are starving. We have maybe a week of food left. If we are careful, we have to do this now, but you cannot go." "I am not hiding behind you," he snarled. "You are not hiding. You are protecting," she shot back. "You are Eli Carver, the man who punched Finch in the street, the man who threatened his men. If you ride out, you will have an accident before you get 5 miles. They are watching you. They are waiting for you." She gripped his arm, her fingers biting into his sleeve. "But me, I am just a woman. I am the whore wife. They do not think I am a threat. They think I am a victim. They think I am something to be laughed at. They are not watching me." He knew she was right. The logic was as cold and sharp as an icicle. It was a coward's move, and it was the only move they had left. "I will not let you," he said, but his voice had no conviction. "You will," she said. "I will ride. I will take Bess. I will take the papers. I will be back in 2 days. You stay here. You keep the fire lit. You keep the rifle loaded. You be here when I get back." The thought of her, alone on that road, made him physically ill. But the thought of her starving, of them both freezing in the dark. He nodded. Once, a short, violent jerk of his head. 2 days. You are not back in 2 days. I am coming, and I am bringing hell with me. They waited. They waited for the new snow to cover the tracks from the fire. They waited 2 days, eating almost nothing, building their strength. He taught her how to reload the small pocket pistol he had, a Derringer. Just in case. You do not show it. You use it. She hid the papers under her dress. She dressed in his clothes, layers of wool, his hat pulled low. At 3 in the morning, in the pitch black, he led Bess from the woods. The mare was nervous, but she was alive. "She is all we have," he said, his voice rough as he helped Clara into the saddle. "I will be careful," she said. She was a small, lost shape in the dark. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her to be safe. He wanted to tell her. He did not know what. He grabbed the bridle, pulling her down. He kissed her, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of fear and wood smoke. "You come back," he growled. "I will," she said, and she was gone, a ghost slipping into the frozen trees, leaving him alone in the dark. The 2 days were the longest of his life. He stayed in the cabin, the door barred, the rifle across his lap. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He just waited. He cleaned his guns. He patched the hole in the wall where the rock had come through, fitting a new plank with agonizing precision. He rationed the last of the firewood. The cabin was too quiet. Every sound was an enemy. Every gust of wind was Finch's men. Every creak of the roof was Clara, dead. On the second night, the sun went down. The purple light faded. The cabin was dark. She was late. He stood up. He unbarred the door. He was going. He had given his word. He stepped outside, the rifle in his hand, and he smelled the snow. It was coming again. He looked at the trail, the one she had taken. He heard it, a low moan. It was not the wind. He ran. He plunged into the trees, following the trail, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. "Clara!" He ran for 1/2 mile. The snow was falling, thick and silent, already covering the tracks. He was going to lose her. "Clara!" He found Bess first. The mare was standing, trembling, her reins broken, nibbling at the bark of a tree. She was alone. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He saw the signs of the struggle. The snow was churned, kicked up. There was a dark, almost black stain near a clump of rocks. He followed the new tracks, a dragging, shuffling track. He found her 10 yards away. She was crumpled at the base of a pine, a small, dark shape. She had been crawling. Clara! He fell to his knees beside her. She was a ruin. Her face! He could barely recognize it. Her lip was split, her eyes swollen shut. One side of her face was a mass of dark, bloody bruises. The clothes he had wrapped her in were torn, and her hand, she was clutching her side, her knuckles white. "Eli," she breathed. The word was a bubble of blood and air. "I am here." He touched her face, his hand shaking. "I am here. They waited for me," she whispered, her voice a shredded thing. "2 of them. Knew I was coming back." "Did they?" He could not ask it. "No." She seemed to read his mind. I used it. The pistol. I think I hit one. They just kicked me. They took the papers. Eli, they took the deed." She had failed. She had lost, but she had fought. "It does not matter," he said, his voice thick. "Nothing matters." He gathered her up in his arms. She weighed nothing. She cried out, a sharp, broken sound. As he lifted her, her ribs. He carried her. He walked, slowly, steadily, back to the cabin, the snow falling around them, silent and white, covering the blood, covering the tracks, covering everything. He laid her on the bed, their bed. He lit every lantern. He built the fire so high the stove glowed red. He cleaned her. He washed the blood from her face, his hands, so large and rough, moving with an impossible gentleness. He found the broken ribs. He found the deep, agonizing bruises. He wrapped her ribs, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He sat on the bed, pulling her up, holding her against his chest, as if he could force his own warmth, his own life, into her. He held her all night, rocking her like a child, the snow falling in silence outside. She woke just before dawn. She was in his arms. She was warm. She was in agony. She looked up at his face, at the lines of grief and rage etched around his eyes. "They took the papers," she whispered again. "I do not care," he said. She turned her head, wincing, to look at the small, dark, safe room. She looked at the boarded window, the stove, the man who was holding her together. "This cabin's mine now," she whispered, her voice fierce, though it was barely a sound. She had not just paid for it with a marriage. She had paid for it with her body. Eli looked down at her broken, swollen face. He felt a crack in his own chest, something breaking open. "No," he said, his voice thick. He leaned his head down, his rough beard brushing her hair. "It is ours." He looked at the new, raw, ugly cut on her cheekbone, the one that would scar. It was a match to the one on her shoulder, a new brand. He leaned in, and he kissed it. He kissed the broken, bruised, and swollen skin. He kissed the mark of her past and the mark of their present. It was a vow, a promise. It was not a kiss of passion. It was an oath. The first sound of spring was the drip. It was not the slow, maddening drip, drip, drip of the leaking roof, a sound that had defined their siege. This was a new sound. It was a fast, frantic, joyful cascade. It was the sound of the world unfreezing. The snow, which had been their white, suffocating prison, began to pull back from the cabin walls. It sank, heavy and wet. The air, once sharp enough to cut, became soft. It carried the scent of damp earth and pine resin. Inside the dark cabin, they healed. Clara's ribs mended with a dull, persistent ache. The bruises on her face faded. A slow, sickening rainbow of purple, to green, to a pale, sallow yellow. The cut on her cheek, the one from the ring of the man she had shot, scarred over, a thin, white line. It was a new mark, one she had earned in battle. Eli tended to her with a gruff, silent devotion. He had been a soldier. He knew wounds. He boiled snow for broth, lacing it with the last of the salt pork. He checked her rib bindings, his rough hands moving with a clinical, practiced touch that was almost gentle. He did not speak of the attack. He did not speak of the papers. He just kept her warm. He kept her alive. They had lost the deed. They had lost the food, but the thaw had brought the game back. Eli, his mended boots solid, his face a mask of grim determination, began to hunt again. And now, he was successful. He brought back rabbits. He brought back a skinny doe. They ate. They regained their strength. When Clara was strong enough to stand, when the ground was more mud than ice, Eli acted. He did not announce it. She woke one morning, and he was gone. Bess was gone. His rifle was gone. A cold panic seized her. He had left her, just as she had feared that first morning. He returned 2 days later. He was exhausted, caked in mud, but his eyes were clear. He had not gone to town. He had gone to the county seat, the one she had never reached. He had not gone with guns. He had gone with his story. He had walked into the territorial judge's office, a different man from the one who had first come to the mountains. He was not a drifter. He was a landowner, a husband. He told the judge everything. He told him about his brother, Jacob. He told him about Amos Finch's first visit. He told him about the traps, the rock, the burned barn, the note. He told him about the wedding. He told him, his voice flat and hard, about the ambush. He told him about his wife's face. The judge, a hard-bitten man who had seen too many land grabs, listened. Finch's mistake had been the man Clara shot. He had not died. He had crawled back to town, his legs shattered. He had told a story about a hunting accident. But when the county sheriff found him, the man confessed. He confessed to the ambush, to the fire, to everything. He named Amos Finch. The ruling came down a week later, delivered by a mounted deputy from the county. The original deed, Jacob's deed, was ruled valid. The marriage was legal. Eli Carver and his wife were the sole, recognized owners of the land. Amos Finch was fined, a heavy, punitive sum for arson, harassment, and conspiracy. It was a victory. It was a piece of paper. When Eli read it to her, Clara did not cry. She just nodded, a slow, solemn motion. "He will not like it," she said. "No," Eli agreed. "He will not." The fine, he knew, was just an insult. It was not justice. It was a temporary truce. The next day, Clara got dressed. She put on the gray calico dress, the one she had patched and washed until it was almost white. She put on her thin shawl. She took the small coin purse Eli had, the one that held the $2 silver from the wedding. "I am going to town," she said. Eli's head snapped up. "I will come with you." "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was not the voice he had first heard in this cabin. It was not frail. It was iron. "This is a thing I have to do. Alone." He looked at her, at the new, pale scar on her cheek. He wanted to argue. He wanted to lock her in the cabin. He wanted to stand between her and the world. But he saw her eyes. She was not asking. He nodded. "Once. Take the Derringer." "I will not need it," she said. She walked the miles to town. The earth was soft, the air warm. She saw the first green shoots of columbine in the rocks. The town had not changed. It was still a place of cold, judgmental eyes. She walked down the main street, her head high. She felt the stares. She heard the whispers stop, then start again. She did not look. She walked into the general store. It went silent. Mrs. Davies, the justice's wife, was there by the fabric bolts. 2 other women, who had been at the saloon, stopped their chatter. The storekeeper froze, his hand in the cracker barrel. They all stared. They stared at her face, at the scar. Clara walked past them, to the counter. She did not look at the women. She did not acknowledge their presence. She looked at the storekeeper. "I need sugar," she said. Her voice was clear and steady in the silent room. "A pound and a bag of beans." The storekeeper, his eyes wide, fumbled for the scoop. "Heard you had some trouble up there." "Mrs." Davies said, her voice sharp, trying to regain control. "Heard that husband of yours." Clara turned. She did not move quickly. She turned her whole body and looked at the woman. She did not speak. She just held her gaze. Mrs. Davies, who had spit near her boots, who had whispered, "Harlot," looked at the woman standing in front of her. This was not the frightened, starving creature who had come in asking for a dead miner. This was not the shamed girl with the rotten apple on her dress. This was Mrs. Eli Carver, and she had a scar on her face that looked a lot like a victory. "Mrs." Davies looked down. She busied herself with a bolt of cloth. The silence was broken. Clara had won. She paid for her sugar, her own coin ringing on the wooden counter. She took her bag, nodded to the storekeeper, and walked out. She did not run. She walked. Eli was waiting for her, just at the edge of town, leaning against a pine. He had his rifle, but he was not aiming it. He was just there. He saw the bag in her hand. He saw the look on her face. He did not say, "Are you all right?" He did not say, "What happened?" He just fell into step beside her, taking the heavy bag from her hand. They walked home. That afternoon, Eli did something strange. He took the boards off the window. The sound of the hammer pulling the nails was a declaration. He ripped the wood away, tore down the oil-stained canvas, and the cabin was suddenly, blindingly, filled with light. It was shocking. The light exposed everything. The patches in the walls, the dirt floor, the scars on their own skin. It was glorious. He spent the next day not hunting, but building, just outside the door. In the patch of earth that got the most sun, he built a small, raised garden bed. He fenced it with thin, carefully cut branches. "For herbs," he said gruffly, not looking at her. "For the cooking." Clara watched him, this man of violence, this soldier, kneeling in the mud, turning the soil with his bare, scarred hands. She went inside. She took the last of the empty flour sacks, the ones she had washed and saved. She cut them, and in the new, bright sunlight streaming through the open window, she sat on their bed and began to stitch. She hemmed the edges with small, neat stitches. When he came in, she was hanging them. Curtains, pale, rough, but clean. They fluttered in the spring breeze coming through the window. The cabin was no longer a fortress. It was a home. They had 2 weeks of this peace, 2 weeks of building. They ate their meals in the sunlight. They slept, not in a fearful huddle, but in a slow, easy warmth. They had survived. The final test came, as it had to. It came on a moonless night. Eli was asleep. Clara was not. She was lying beside him, listening to the wind in the pines. It was no longer a howl, it was a song. Then she heard it. A different sound. A horse stepping carefully, then another. She sat bolt upright, her hand closing on Eli's arm. "Eli!" He was awake in an instant. He did not speak. He just listened. The horses were close, too close, and then the smell, faint but unmistakable. Kerosene. "He is here," Eli breathed. It was not a question. He was moving, grabbing his rifle. "Clara, the bed! Stay down!" "No," she said. She was already out of the bed, grabbing the other rifle, the heavy Springfield she had first aimed at him. He had cleaned it. It was loaded. "Clara, I fire first," she whispered, her voice fierce. "This is my home." They moved to their positions. He took the door. She took the window. They stood in the dark, breathing as one. Waiting. A voice, thick with drink and rage, broke the silence. "Carver, you in there? Carver?" It was Amos Finch. "That fine ain't going to build your barn back," he bellowed. "And it ain't going to buy your wife a new face. I come to finish the job." They heard the scrape of a match, a sudden, bright flare of light. Finch was on his horse, not 10 yards from the window. He was holding a lit torch. He raised his arm to throw it. Clara stood in the open window, framed in the moonlight, her new curtain fluttering beside her. She raised the Springfield. She did not hesitate. She did not think. She just pointed, as Eli had taught her. She fired. The explosion of the rifle in the small cabin was deafening. The shot hit Finch square in the chest. He looked, his face a mask of pure shock, a small, dark hole appearing on his shirt. He dropped the torch and toppled from his horse like a sack of grain. "Now!" Eli roared. He kicked the door open, rolling out into the dark, just as 2 shots exploded where he had been standing. He was in the shadows. They were outlined against the dark trees. 2 men, Finch's men. The gunfight was not a long, noble duel. It was fast, brutal, and ugly. Eli fired. The man on the left, still fumbling with his rifle, dropped. The second man wheeled, firing wildly. His shot splintered the door frame where Clara's head had been. Eli fired again. The second man crumpled. Silence. The only sound was the hissing of the dropped torch in the wet grass, the smoke, the smell of powder. Eli stayed in the shadow, rifle up, scanning the trees. Nothing. He waited a full minute. "It is done," he said. He walked out. He checked Finch. Dead. He checked the other 2. Dead. He stood in the middle of the yard, the smoke curling around his boots. He looked at the 3 bodies. He felt nothing, not victory, not relief, just empty. Clara came out. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the rifle. She looked at the man she had shot, his body a dark lump in the grass. Eli went to her. He did not hug her. He gently took the heavy rifle from her hands. "Go inside," he said. "Make coffee. It is going to be a long night." He rode Bess to town at sunrise. He did not go to the justice. He went to the marshal, the county sheriff, the one who had taken his report. The sheriff rode back with him. He looked at the 3 bodies. He looked at the dropped torch, the spilled can of kerosene. He looked at the bullet hole in the window frame. He looked at Clara, standing on the porch, her face pale but her eyes steady. "Finch was warned," the sheriff said, pulling at his mustache. He spat. He did not listen. He looked at Eli. "You got a shovel?" "I do," Eli said. "This was self-defense. Carver, clear as day. But I do not want these men buried here. It is unseemly. Bury them up on the ridge, far from the cabin. I will file the report." Eli nodded. He spent the rest of the day digging. He buried them deep, in the rocky soil, far from the cabin, far from his brother's grave. He buried Amos Finch, the man who had haunted his life, and he buried the past with him. When he returned, the sun was setting. The cabin was quiet. He found Clara in the small herb garden he had built. She was on her knees, in the dirt. She had found a flower, a single, brave white daisy that had survived the snow, and she was planting it. She was crying. She was not making a sound, just huge, silent tears rolling down her face, splashing onto the dark earth. She was crying for the man she had killed, for the men she had seen die, for the fear and the hunger and the shame, for the simple, terrible cost of being left alone. Eli stood behind her. He did not speak. He just knelt, his knees sinking into the mud. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. He held her, his big, rough, earth-stained hands covering her small, trembling ones. "It is over," he whispered, his face in her hair. "It is all over." I killed him," she sobbed, the sound tearing out of her. "You defended your home," he said, his voice fierce.
You defended us!
He held her as she wept, her grief washing over them, cleaning the last of the blood and the powder away. He held her until the sky was purple, until the first stars came out. We do not owe anyone silence anymore, he said. Later that night, the cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the stove. The new curtains fluttered in the breeze from the open window. They lay in the bed, the one he had found her in, the one he had fixed, the one they had shared in fear, and then in want. Now they shared it in peace. He was on his back, one arm behind his head. She was curled against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand on his chest. He could feel her breathing. He looked at the roof beams, the ones that had once held his brother's noose. They were just beams. They held up a roof, their roof. She stirred, tracing the line of an old scar on his collarbone. Eli, she whispered. It is quiet. He listened. The wind was moving through the pines, but it was just wind. The fire crackled. The cabin was solid. It stood. He kissed the top of her head. It is, he said. Get some sleep. He was no longer a man running from his past. She was no longer a woman defined by hers. They were not broken. They were just two people who had survived war, and winter, and love. And they were home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West Campfire. Let us know what you thought and where you are listening from in the comments so you can connect with other folks. Subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts.